Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Welcome to our guest, Mr. Sai Alba of Polaro Mazda. We're excited to host today's CIO-SP4 town hall. We have received a lot of good questions ahead of time and I'm sure we'll get more today. The Q&A line is open, so if you have questions, please feel free to submit your questions. We have over 500 participants today, so we may not be able to get to all questions during the webinar, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm your host and moderator. My name is Reena Bhatia. I'm the CEO of Proposal Helper and Bid Execs. I bring 25 years experience in business development, capture, and proposal management. The Proposal Helper leadership team has been involved in all versions of CIO-SP since its beginning. We have also supported other major IDIQs such as Alliant 2, OASIS, SEC 10IT, and others on small business and on the unrestricted side. Our company provides proposals not just to the US federal market, but we also provide support to public sector and commercial contracting across US, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East. For those of you who are new to Proposal Helper, a few quick differentiators about our company. One is that we are process focused. We provide an entire proposal team to support you, not one person. We don't use consultants. All people who support proposals for our clients are employees of the company. This is so that your data is secure. We provide fixed price proposal support for those of you thinking about going after the CIO-SP4 proposal. You don't need to wait till December when the RFP comes out. You can start working on it right now. We also provide modularized support, and our senior management mentors, trains, and oversees all proposal team members. As far as we know, we're the only proposal company who has ISO 27001 and ISO 9001 certifications. Let me quickly introduce our guest speaker now. Sai Alba is a partner at Polaro Mazda. From Prime Sub joint venture CTA mentor proteges, Sai has supported many small and mid-sized companies in structuring these arrangements. We're looking forward to him answering some of the nail-biting questions that have gotten the entire industry excited. A little bit about the firm, Polaro Mazda. They're an excellent legal partner and we highly recommend them. Before I hand off the microphone, a disclaimer: this webinar is for informational purposes only. We are not providing legal opinions or legal advice here. Quick notes, as I mentioned, we are recording this webinar. It will be made public on our different media channels. All participants will have access to it. We will also provide a complete list of Q&As that have been submitted before, during, and maybe even after this webinar. Once you have listened to all information about this opportunity, you may decide your company is not going to pursue CIO-SP4. It may not be a right fit for you. I encourage you all to follow Proposal Helper on LinkedIn. We release different IDIQs on our LinkedIn account every Friday. We don't just track the celebrity IDIQs like CIO-SP4. There are plenty of other opportunities you can look at. With that being said, here's the history of this IDIQ, and if you dispute any of these numbers, I would not be surprised. There's enough confusion out there. CIO-SP1 started in 1996. At that time, it was 20 awards and $10 billion ceiling. It has progressed since then to CIO-SP4, where we're anticipating about 400 potential awards, or a little over 400 potential awards with a $40 billion ceiling. This is the timeline for CIO-SP4. When is it coming out? The draft RFP is already out on the streets. If you're not already preparing your proposal, you're wasting good, valuable time. Final RFP release is anticipated to be December 2020, with proposals due in the second quarter or FY21. What do we expect overall? On CIO-SP3, the government received 552 proposals. Of that, 167 were 8A proposals and 70 were HUBZone. The rest were in the other small business categories. If you go to the NITAC website and you look for CIO-SP3 small business category or the small business contract, you will see the different numbers of contract awardees in the different small business categories. The landscape is far more competitive this time. We anticipate stringent competition, but I will repeat this multiple times throughout. CIO-SP4, as with many of these IDIQs, is a process of elimination first, and then a process of selection. Compliance, compliance, compliance. Please don't let that falter. These are the topics of discussion that we're going to go through today. I'm not going to read every single bullet point, but I know Sai is excited to focus on all questions related to teaming that have propped up. So with that being said, Sai, I'm going to hand over the microphone to you. Let me know when you want me to shift to the next few slides.
Okay, that sounds good. Hey, everybody. Yeah, so as Rena said, I know there were a number of questions that came up that we'll get to specifically on some of the teaming and past performance and some of that. So just hold tight. At first, there's, just so you know, there's a couple phases, first of all, to Rena's point about compliance. So when they're going to evaluate this, they're going to do it in two phases. Phase one is going to look at just the go, no-go, which is basically going to be your task one proposal, which is written right here on the page, IT services for biomedical research, health sciences, and healthcare, right? That is the key task area. Everyone who submits a proposal for CIO-SP4 has to submit and show qualifications for that task area. This includes small businesses, HUBZone, woman-owned, 8A, any of the categories. You have to have that, plus some of the others, which we'll get into in a second. So that's your first go, no-go. If your proposal doesn't have task area one, you're going to be kicked out. Also, there's going to be a self-scoring sheet. They're going to be ranked highest to lowest, and the government's going to make some sort of cutoff. We don't know what it is. It wasn't listed. It might not even be listed in the final RFP, but there will be some cutoff, and anyone below that cutoff will not be, their proposal will not be reviewed any further. They're also going to look and make sure that you have all the required documentation included. That means like there are reps and certs, there's adequate accounting system evidence that's going to be required. You have to at least bid, and we'll go through this again, on different categories, different groups, whether you're HUBZone or small business or woman-owned or 8A or other than small business, you have to bid on a specific number of task areas. And if you don't, that's also going to get you thrown out. It's only after you get through this series of go, no-go factors where you will then actually have your proposal substantively evaluated. And I think there's going to be probably a number of protests that people file, most likely pro se, when they get eliminated from this initial phase, saying, well, you didn't even look at my proposal. You didn't even make a determination. Well, the RFP is pretty clear that they're not going to look at the substance, if it doesn't change, obviously, that they're not going to look at the substance of your proposal until they go through this phase one analysis, which is essentially a check the box exercise to make sure that you hit every requirement. I think the biggest one on this that people need to be aware of is that they're going to require you to have an adequate accounting system. And that the adequacy of that accounting system is going to have to be justified by either an agency personnel, DCAA, DCMA, or the cognizant auditing agencies of basically approving or saying you have this system, or a third-party CPA that's qualified to certify. And that's something that I know in like Oasis and some of the other awards, people got points for it. As the RFP is currently written here, it is an absolute requirement. So that being said, those are your first go, no-go key issues. And then you get into the various task areas. And as you can see up here, there are 10 task areas. The focus here is I think my interpretation of this is that the focus is clearly on new and sort of emerging technologies. There are sections in the RFP that suggest that you will be downgraded or at least not as highly rated if you propose a number of legacy projects or that you show expertise in legacy systems. They want to see current systems, they want to see cybersecurity, they want to see cloud, they want to see digital media issues. And not only that, but you will also be more highly rated if you can show for each of these task areas a clear integration between healthcare personnel in your organization or team and the IT group in that same team. So they really want you to bring that together, and there is a focus on it. It's not a go, no-go factor. And it's also not something there it's explicitly stating if you do not have your healthcare personnel working in tandem closely with your IT folks that you'll be downgraded. However, those organizations or teams that can show close synergy, and the word they use is tandem, working in tandem between healthcare and other folks, that is going to take you to the next level. You're going to be more highly rated, and that's for all of these task areas where they want to see that combination. Looking at each of them, the technical factors themselves are, I think, fairly clear from the RFP. So I would highly recommend that you go through with your technical personnel and review each of the different task areas, what's required by each of the different task areas, and as Sharina and Proposal Helper can tell you, speaking directly to all the requirements in there is critical. If you're not speaking to all the requirements, if you're just using generic language, that's one of the number one things I see on the protest side of why people say, you know, the agency didn't understand this, or I do this with the agency. I currently have a CIO-SP4 task order where I'm doing outsourcing and IT maintenance and integration services, and they downgraded me for that. Well, this RFP specifically states, as many of them do, they're not obligated to look outside of what you put in your proposal. So you need to put everything in your proposal that you want them to look at. Make no assumptions that they're going to look elsewhere. That is never a requirement unless it specifically says in the RFP they're going to do it. And the sections in the RFP that you will read if you go through the whole thing that says we reserve the right to go look at other things, that language doesn't require them to do it. So I always look at it as being, if they want to look at something in their discretion to help you or hurt you, they're allowed to, but they don't have to. That being said, if you have it on good authority, if you know that a number of your competitors, that the government did look elsewhere and they had the same access to information for that competitor as they did to you, and they ignored that other information and only looked at your competitor, that would give you a basis potentially to protest those sorts of things. But obviously that's down the line. Easier to put it in your proposal and make sure that it's absolutely clear for each of these various areas. So one of the big questions I think we've been getting is, okay, who can order on CIO-SP4? And is it open? Can every agency buy on it? Absolutely. Every agency in the federal government, this is a GWAC, a government-wide acquisition contract. So every agency in the government, and it's intended for every agency to be able to order off of it. There is, I think, more of a focus in CIO-SP4 on the healthcare-related issues than on CIO-SP3. However, there's still enough wiggle room here for the various task orders for agencies to use it more broadly as they are now with CIO-SP3. It's probably a good bet that the same people who ordered off of CIO-SP3 are going to continue to order off of CIO-SP4. Mainly that's been HHS, which isn't shocking. DOD has also been a very large buyer, and DHS as well. So really the two big ones are HHS and DOD. So just being aware of that these are large agencies that are buying a lot off of this. And I think with the push for best-in-class vehicles and the expansion of CIO-SP4 as far as value and ceiling, that we're going to see those grow probably in the same proportion as they grew prior. So if you're working in those areas or if you're targeting those agencies, this is obviously a perfect vehicle to go after. We got a lot of questions on what task areas do I have to bid, which ones are critical. And as you can see from this slide, the one that's on all the way across the board, that is the task one, the go, no go for task one. So you have to have that healthcare IT experience. You need to show it, you need to prove it. Other than that though, there is no specific requirement that you have to bid on any of the other task areas. It's just a requirement to bid on a certain number of the other ones. If you are an other and small business, you have to bid on all of them. So whether you're putting together a bid as a joint venture, prime sub, however you're doing it by yourself, which probably is unlikely, but if you're bidding on those things as an other than small business, anyone who doesn't qualify as small or one of the other categories, you have to submit a proposal for all 10 task areas, and then that would include having to show experience in all of those other task areas. The corporate experience factor. Remember, another thing of note that we'll get into is corporate experience is different from past performance. And there are different limitations. For small businesses, if you're just a vanilla small business and you're not seeking to get awarded in any of the subset groups, you have to have 8 task areas. So essentially means aside from number 1, which you have to have, you can skip on the other on 2. When you're looking at HUBZone, you can skip on 5, same with STV-OSB, same with WOSB. With 8A, I think the issue here is they didn't get as much or have the same level of confidence, I think, in their HUBZone, STV-OSB, and WOSB awards, and they want to get more of them at the table. So that's why for HUBZone, STV-OSB, and WOSB, they've reduced the number of task areas that you have to bid on in the hopes of getting more people across a wider array of the task areas. And for 8A companies, I think they've seen a number of 8A companies with especially STARS 2, which is now becoming STARS 3, and a number of other IT vehicles that they feel comfortable. There's a lot of 8A companies that could participate on this. And so they're requiring more of them, and similar to what they're requiring for small businesses. So be aware of that these numbers are very important. And this is going to be one of those go, no-go factors. If they look and you say, you're bidding as a HUBZone entity and you only bid 4 task areas, or you bid 5 task areas and you miss task area 1, they're going to throw your proposal out without reading it. So be aware of that.
Sai, there's a question related to this here that I'm going to bring up. And that is, there are companies who are asking if they're 8A, they're also HUBZone. Do they have to submit 2 separate proposals, or do they automatically get grandfathered in? My understanding is if you're an 8A and HUBZone, you get grandfathered in, you don't submit separate proposals. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, they're only going to make 1 award. So no matter who you're bidding or how many of these things you're bidding on, or if you get accepted into multiple different groups, they're only going to award 1 contract per prime contract submission, per proposal. And that's going to, though, potentially include every area. So if you're a HUBZone, STV-OSB, woman-owned 8A company, you qualify as a small business HUBZone, all of those. And you will get 1 contract and be able to participate in all of those groups at the same time. However, you will have to meet whichever task area bids are required for the group that you're bidding on. So if you're a HUBZone 8A and you bid 5 task areas, you're going to be eliminated from the 8A group. But there's nothing in here that says if it's clear on the face of your proposal that you're going after both, that they would absolutely throw you out. However, I do think it's a risk that if you say, I'm going after 8A and HUBZone, that in that first go, no-go, if they see you have 5 task areas, instead of dropping you down and saying, well, you're not eligible for 8A, so we're just going to evaluate you with regard to HUBZone, there's enough discretion in the RFP to kick your entire proposal. So if you're, whichever the highest level is you're going for, make sure you hit those task areas and the various go, no-go factors.
Right. And the question on why is WOSB highlighted, the reason it is CIO-SP3 did not have a separate category for woman-owned small business. This time they do. So that's an addition and a difference between CIO-SP3 and CIO-SP4. That's why it's highlighted.
Right. And you'll also notice, I think we got a question earlier on the idea that one section of the RFP doesn't say anything about woman-owned or economically disadvantaged woman-owned, and the other section of the RFP, specifically with the task areas in the section we're talking about here, lists it. You know, that's confusing. What is it? Well, that's a factor of the fact this is a draft RFP. I think it's clear from the other sections of the RFP that they intended every small business type to be included. What is interesting, though, is they also included VOSB, which is veteran-owned small business, and that designation does not exist in law or regulation outside of the VA. So I think that is also a mistake. So don't buy in to CIO-SP4 thinking, well, I'm not an SDVOSB, but I'm a VOSB. So I'm gonna bid on this. I'm gonna get qualified as a VOSB. I think when the final RFP comes out, you're gonna see that text eliminated, because that designation, no agency is allowed to use that designation or get credit for it except for the VA. There is no such thing as a VOSB set aside in the Small Business Act, which is government-wide.
And the other question that has come up is SDB. If you're a small disadvantaged business, what category do you fall under?
So if you're an SDB, that's sort of a legacy qualification. The states use it, but the Small Business Administration has put that in the sort of mothballed it, if you will. And they've determined that that's an 8A designation, but you need to actually be 8A certified to be 8A. So SDB is no longer an independent certification as far as a small business is concerned. So if you have nothing else but that, you would be under the small business pool.
I'll take one more question or give you one more question on this before we move on. Will HUBZone women-owned small business and SDVOSBs that bid more than the minimum number of tasks be more favorably evaluated?
It doesn't explicitly state that you would be more favorably rated if you bid more tasks, because the way the RFP is set up, it's like each task is looked at potentially individually. There might even be different groups looking at evaluators, looking at different tasks. So inside of each task, the things that you'll get more credit for are things like showing close in tandem work, like I said, between the IT or healthcare, or showing that in past performance that you have services you implemented across an enterprise, like enterprise level work, that your PM has experience working on like CIO-SP3 or items that are extremely similar to CIO-SP4 and sort of mapping that back and forth. There aren't many other areas where they've expressly stated that you're going to get more favorably rated other than those.
Yeah, and this is, Rena, in my opinion here, this is just my opinion. This is a process of elimination, not a process of selection. Until we see the scorecard, we're not going to know about the extra points and more favorable rating. If there is no extra point or there are no extra points for additional task areas, you unnecessarily introduce risk by responding to more task areas. So you may want to think about that. At the same time, you also won't see task orders in those additional task areas if you don't bid on them. So that's another thing that you need to balance out.
So when it comes down to key personnel, there are only a couple, like we listed here. As far as the draft RFP is concerned, it's your program manager, like for the contract, and it's the contract administrators for your whole effort. And these are the individuals that they really want to make sure have the skills and expertise. And like I mentioned before, with the PM in particular, that person is called out as saying, look, if you can show experience on programs of similar size and scope to CIO-SP4, then you will be more highly evaluated. Now, if you look at the RFP, it says experience to CIO-SP3. I think that's probably a typo, but some of the experience is similar. So, but I would focus on CIO-SP4. Do you have experience working in these specific areas? Does this PM have experience overseeing IT work where healthcare is closely integrated and we're working with healthcare personnel and the IT services in tandem, those sorts of things? If you can double up and show that, you're definitely going to be more highly rated. Also, they're going to look at, this isn't directly related to your program manager or contract administrator, but when they're looking at your management approach in factor 3, what they're looking at there as well is the size and age and structure of your organization, the quality control, whether or not your individuals have been able to manage internal and external resources. So to the extent you can go through the factor 3 in particular, management approach, and sort of integrate the ideas within factor 3 into the resumes of these individuals and show without blowing up your page limit, because certain things are excluded from your page limit. So if you have a good solid resume for someone that has all of this evidence and crosswalking things in the RFP, I think that's going to be beneficial to you as well. So just realize these are the key folks. Otherwise, so this is also a broad contract issue. It's a $40 billion ceiling, but a $250 minimum. So most likely within a week, they're going to issue everybody a check for $250, and that's all you're entitled to. However, obviously with a $40 billion ceiling, there's a lot to do there, and there's going to be a lot of heated competition. I think the expected awards right now are one piece of the RFP says for other than small, it's going to be 75 to 125, and then 200 to 300 for small businesses. And that includes WOSB, HUBZone, and SDVOSB, and then another 25 to 75 for 8A. So there's going to be a lot of competition for that 40 billion. But as we know with these best-in-class category management, this is going to be a big seat at the table for people. It also requires you to make sure that you're proposing prices for both on-site and off-site personnel, and that you fill out all of the labor categories. So what's a bit of a disconnect between only bid certain tasks and the labor category chart is the RFP suggests that you need to have every labor category covered in order to be eligible. So arguably, if there's certain labor categories that only go with a certain task, that might be a good point of clarification with Q&As and see if it's really necessary. It might just be a mistake in the draft RFP. There will be no price realism analysis performed. So they're not going to look and see whether or not your pricing is too low. They're going to assume that from proper competition, and these are sort of fixed rates that you're bidding at least, but these rates are only ceiling rates. So you can't go higher, but you can go lower. So I think one thing I've seen also in protests in the past is people are upset that certain individuals bid too low and that they should have been kicked out and things of that nature. Well, the government doesn't explicitly say they're going to look at that. They will look at risk, but just be aware that it's more of a business determination as to how low can you go, because you can't go any higher once you start bidding actual task orders. But at the same time, if you go too high to give yourself a ton of wiggle room, they will be evaluating it and they will be making a determination about whether or not your price seems like it's too high, because they are doing the price reasonableness analysis. They're not doing realism too low, but they are doing realism too high.
All right, everybody's all-time favorite topic.
Yeah, and so we kind of structured this a little differently than maybe what people are thinking when they're thinking about, well, am I doing this as a JV? Am I doing this as a prime sub? Am I doing this as a CTA? And everyone uses the word CTA and they have the GSA CTA in the back of their head. I think it's important to understand this, and we got a lot of questions about this. CTA in the RFP is a CTA under FAR 9601. The 9601 has two parts, a part 1 and a part 2. Part 1, all that means is a joint venture. Part 2, all that means it's a prime contractor-subcontractor relationship. That's it. When you look at the word CTA scattered throughout this RFP, it's talking about one of those two things. When it says a 9601 CTA, all they mean is a joint venture. When it says a 96012 CTA, all they mean is a prime contractor-subcontractor relationship. The concept of a CTA in GSA is actually, it's made up. It's a construct of GSA. It doesn't exist in law or regulation at all, which might be surprising to folks. But that's why sort of SBA has no rules about how to deal with the GSA CTA, because SBA refuses to acknowledge that it exists. Their position is until Congress passes something or there's some regulations on it, they're going to ignore it. And similarly, this RFP is talking about a CTA under the FAR, so do not get confused and start adding in concepts from what you know of as a GSA CTA. For instance, one person asked, are all members of a CTA under FAR 96011 prime contractors? No. 96011 is just a joint venture. There is one prime contractor, and that is the joint venture. It can be an LLC that you formed. If you just did it by contract, you're a legal partnership under state law. You're a general partnership. It will be the partnership will be the offeror and the prime contractor. It will not be the members. So I know it's confusing because they use the word CTA all through here, and the context isn't entirely clear. Sometimes they use CTA and they specify it's a JV and a 96011 CTA or it's prime sub. Sometimes they don't specify, and that causes confusion as to what they really mean. So hopefully there'll be more clarification, but we'll go through some of the specific issues up next. So starting with prime sub, because that's the one that's most limiting, and we got a number of questions on this. So the FAR 96012 CTA that's talked about in the RFP is nothing more than a single prime contractor with subcontractors underneath. That's all it is. So given other terms in this RFP, it says that, starting with the second one, it says only the prime will be considered for award and evaluation, except for the evaluation of the resources part, which is factor 3, sub-factor 2. And so what's important to note there is that it seems because of that, that the PM rather, and the contract manager have to be employees of the prime contractor, and their email address has to be an email address from the actual prime contractor. And that it doesn't look like they're going to take into account anything from subcontractors, at least the way it's currently written. I think the past performance section will probably be changed so that they will allow past performance for subcontractors or maybe major subcontractors. They might add some language in there, is just my guess based on what most of the new RFPs do. However, the current RFP only lists past performance being allowed or not allowed for joint ventures. And it says for JVs, your 96011 CTAs, your joint ventures, that past performance is allowed, but it doesn't say anything about prime sub. So I think the takeaway is that unless it's changed, they're only going to allow past performance, and there's only 3 references, remember, that's allowed. They're only going to allow past performance for the prime contractors. However, it does specifically state that every team member of a CTA needs to have an adequate accounting system. And it does not specify in the draft RFP that that type of CTA is a 96011 or joint venture type of CTA. It just says CTA. So because of that, as currently written, the best analysis of that section is that all primes and subcontractors must have adequate accounting systems that are certified by a third-party CPA that's qualified or an agency, DCA, DCMA, or a cognizant civilian agency. But if you are in a prime sub relationship, you don't have to submit your subcontract. So there aren't, outside of what's in the RFP and all the requirements in the RFP, you don't have to submit additional documentation like your subcontracts or proof of that. If you're a large business prime, you will have to submit a subcontracting plan. That's just a standard FAR requirement. Every member of the CTA in this prime sub context will also have to submit a Section K that's specific to themselves. So that's sort of a encapsulation of the prime sub rules that are specific. And then going on to joint ventures, joint ventures are this 96012 CTA. In the case of a joint venture, the JV agreement, there is a section in the RFP that specifically lists information that has to be in your joint venture agreement. And it specifically says that that agreement also has to meet, if you're a small business, has to meet all of the SBA requirements. Also, if you have a certain number of members in your joint venture, whether it's a partnership, you did it by contract or an LLC or however, you need to specify in the joint venture agreement that there's CO approval is required to add or remove any member, or replacing members as well, having people leave and get replaced. If someone leaves or goes bankrupt or something happens, the RFP says you need to have something in place in your agreement that's going to say how you're going to deal with that, and that you're going to notify the contracting officer and get their approval as soon as possible. The good thing is that past performance is allowed for all members of the joint venture. And it doesn't say anything about only looking at past performance for specific members who do the work, but I can see some risk in, let's say your 3 past performance references that you use are all references for some team member. None of them are for the team lead. And it's for a team member who bid on task area 3, and all the past performance references you use are for task area 5 and 7. I think the government, there's enough wiggle room in here, the government could say, well, that's a high risk. You didn't show any performance doing the categories that you actually bid or that the individuals are supposed to be operating on. As I said before, just like with a prime sub, all members of this CTA have to have their own adequate accounting systems, and they have to be all justified and approved. You have to have written proof of that from the agency or from a third-party CPA. So that's an absolute requirement. That's one of the critical go, no-go requirements in this RFP that I think people might miss or not understand because they think it's unfair or something to that effect. Also, all pricing has to be shared with the team lead for now. I think in CIO-SP4, they allowed people to seal their pricing and submit it in a separate package so that the team lead wouldn't have access. I think that's probably going to happen here too. but you also have to provide a letter with your CTA JV package saying that the team lead has the authority to speak on behalf of everyone, and that you've given that lead permission to review information, you have NDAs in place, that kind of thing as well. And then there's a few other requirements.
So, Sai, I think we have created a whole bunch of questions around teaming as have the questions, multiple questions, several questions saying, can you have a subcontractor if you have formed a CTA?
So that's where, let's stop using the term CTA because it's too confusing. I know it's in the RFP, but if you're in a joint venture, a 96012, it's 96012 CTA. If you're in a joint venture, then yes, the joint venture can have subcontractors. However, it doesn't, for use of past performance and for other reasons in the evaluation, it only says that that those members will be considered offerors for purposes of this evaluation. So any subcontractors that are not members of the joint venture, it's not guaranteed. In the draft RFP, it does not say they're going to consider them.
The other question that is repeatedly asked is over under. Can you be a prime and a sub on multiple teams? I know that the other CIO-SP4 webinars and government sort of guidelines is they don't want to see too many cross teamings going on. But what are your thoughts based on how the draft RFP is written in terms of cross teaming?
Yeah, so there is no restriction in the draft RFP on cross teaming. I think that general sense from the agency is coming from DOJ. For people who don't know, DOJ put in a new, what they call strike force, which is supposed to be ferreting out antitrust violations. And one of the big things that they're looking at is exclusivity amongst contractors in the federal government and locking down specific team members. However, I don't want people to get scared about that because it's a very narrow scope of when you can actually get in trouble for a Sherman Act violation or something like that, locking down some very special, unique subcontractor. Your general exclusivity provisions should be fine, but there's this sense in the government because of this push, and DOJ has been meeting with CEOs and everything else, that they don't want this to happen for eliminating bid rigging and things of that nature. But when you have 300 proposals, I don't see how you being on 3 different teams is going to create a bid rigging or antitrust scenario.
All right, so as of right now, the way it is written, you can be on multiple teams, you just cannot be multiple prime. You cannot submit multiple proposals as a prime.
Right, and to go back to the explanation of members of a CTA are not all primes. If you're in a joint venture, I'll stop using CTA. If you're in a joint venture, you're not all prime contractors. The joint venture itself is the prime. So the team lead on a CTA and under this RFP could bid as a prime with subcontractors, and they could be the team lead on a joint venture that's, say, an LLC, and that LLC bids. There isn't anything in this draft RFP that prevents it.
All right, hopefully that has eliminated a whole bunch of questions. If not, we'll go back and review them again.
Another thing to be important to note when you're dealing with joint ventures is that it is requiring you to do a breakdown of the pricing and responsibilities by member. And that, I think it means that they want to see who's going to be responsible for which labor categories and which task areas, but not that you have to exclude others from that. So I think you can, if you have 3 members to a joint venture, all 3 could be responsible for everything. But that being said, in the corporate experience section, I could see them requiring you to submit evidence of experience for every task area you're going after, or even if it's not an express requirement, saying it's risky if you fail to do that. And I will note on corporate experience, the entirety of section M was missing. So we have section L, which is what you're supposed to be putting in your proposal. But as far as how they're going to evaluate corporate experience, there is nothing written. It's blank. And I think that was an error. All they have is past performance. Also, it requires you in your joint venture agreement to say how long it's going to last. Make sure you don't just pull something off the internet and use it for a whole myriad of reasons. But one of them is that if it says, hey, this joint venture agreement is going to last for 5 years, because that's the generic length of federal contracts. Once that 5-year rolls around and you didn't change that, the government can off-ramp you because of that. They can say, well, your JV's done, so you're out. You're like, well, we didn't mean that. So just make sure it either has no term in it or that the life is for the full 15 years of this contract. And the reason I say 15 years is 5 and 5, but you can have a task order issued at the 11th hour on year 10 that lasts 5 years. So it's effectively a 15-year contract. Everyone, whether you're in a prime sub or a joint venture, all members, all parties have to submit reps and certs under Section K. All members are considered the offeror. Again, this is only for JVs. So for every purpose in this entire evaluation, all members should be included in the way it's currently written. And then in addition to the specific requirements in the RFP as to what has to be in your JV agreement, if you're submitting as a small business or any other category, woman-owned, HUBZone, STVO-SP, 8A, you have to follow all of the SBA requirements in your joint venture. That includes, if you have an existing JV that you want to use, having a specific addendum for CIO-SP4 that's going to specify everything required in, if you're a small business, 125.8. 13 CFR 125.8 has a list of things. You got to make sure all of that is covered and captured in here, in addition to the requirements of the RFP itself. You don't want to win and then have a situation where the JV agreement wasn't put together or is missing elements, because SBA nowadays, if you get protested, they have a checklist and they just go down the list. And if something's missing, that's it, you're out. So moving on to like mentor protege, this is another piece. And the RFP had specific rules in here for mentor protege. And it was odd because I think there were things put in here accidentally. First is to note that the size standard for this procurement is not 27.5 million, it's 30 million. And that could change. If the size standard increase again in fiscal year 2021, pay attention, because the day that you submit your proposal and you certify as a small business, whether you're doing it as a prime contractor, you're doing it in a joint venture where everyone has to be small under the size standard, or you're doing it in a mentor protege prime sub or mentor protege joint venture where only the protege and the other small business people in the JV have to qualify, it's 30 million, not 27.5, and it could go up. Again, just like with all the other stuff we've talked about, everybody needs an adequate accounting system, and you need proof from a third-party verifier. Why that's specifically in the mentor protege section, I don't know. I think it's a mistake. I think this is meant to be put more broadly, which is why I included it elsewhere, so just be aware of that. It also says in the RFP that you need a small business subcontracting plan. Again, that doesn't make any sense. If you're in a mentor protege joint venture or mentor protege prime sub, the JV is a small business, or the prime contractor protege has to be. If you're eligible as a small business, you're exempted from the subcontracting plan. So don't get confused if you're looking at the RFP and you see that. It's a mistake. OCI identification mitigation plans, again, I think that's a mistake that it's stuck in mentor protege. So just because you're not in a mentor protege, don't skip over that whole section of the RFP. I think these elements are meant to be read more broadly, and that's probably going to get fixed. So you're probably going to have identify OCIs and put a mitigation plan in place. That's a general FAR requirement anyway. Also, the RFP itself seems to be confusing a mentor-protege arrangement with a joint venture, and I've seen this from clients elsewhere. They are entirely different concepts. You can have a mentor-protege and not have a joint venture, and you can have a joint venture without a mentor-protege. So just be aware of that. And then for 8A specific offerors, they're going to require proof of 8A eligibility, and you're also going to have to give them all the contact information for your BOS and your servicing field office so they can verify it themselves. So just be aware of that. Those are sort of the special requirements listed under mentor protege.
I'm going to quickly touch on the scorecard here and then open up to some questions. We've taken up almost the entire hour. So the most common question, one of the most common questions was, what is the scorecard that the government is talking about? What does it look like? Where do we find a copy of it? Where is the CIO-SP4 scorecard? There wasn't a scorecard before. CIO-SP has not ever used a scorecard. This is the first time they have decided to use it. They have mentioned that in their draft RFP. We don't know what it's going to look like, and we would be speculating very heavily if we tried to come up with what it might look like. Having said that, OASIS is the most recent example of an IDIQ that used a scorecard. And what you're seeing here on my screen, what is crossed out is a comparison between the unrestricted OASIS and small business OASIS scorecard. What were the differences? You can do this exercise on your own. You can reach out to us. We'll be happy to provide you with this if OASIS scorecard is of any use to you at this point. However, the corporate experience, that little one single line that has been put in on a $5 million corporate experience, you will see that in the OASIS scorecard for the large business or unrestricted, each project, the minimum started at 5 million on an annual basis. For the small business track of OASIS, it was changed to 750,000 or more on an annual basis, but it's an escalating scale. The higher your annual value of your contracts were, the higher your score was. Will they follow the same thing? We don't know. So there's no, as I said, no precedent. You can use, get some ideas from what OASIS went through. Alliant 2 Small Business also used a scorecard, and you can find those very easily. As far as the points are concerned, other than corporate experience, on the OASIS, there was heavy emphasis on a company's ability to have managed other multiple award IDIQs. Companies amass IDIQs, but are you doing any actual work on it? Are you winning task orders? Are you marketing it? I think that may be a consideration given the number of awardees. And oddly enough, we found that given that this is an IT-related procurement, there is no CMMI certification listed, which I think at this point may just be an oversight. That may change when the final RFP comes out. And before I move on to that, for those companies who have been planning to get your CMMI certifications or who have been dragging feet on getting their CMMI appraisals done, not certifications, this would be a good time between now and December to refocus your efforts and see if you can get that appraisal done. Lessons learned from CIO-SP4. As I mentioned before, compliance, compliance, compliance. It's the process of elimination first. They're going to look for any small thing to throw you out so that they can reduce the number of proposals they have to evaluate. CIO-SP4, the evaluation, believe it or not, did not follow CIO-SP2, especially when it came to evaluating how you responded to the actual task areas. CIO-SP2 where they emphasized your experience. CIO-SP4 emphasized your approach. And even within that approach, they were very particular on how they wanted you to respond to the task areas. So they're, make sure that whomever you work with, your proposal team, your bid team understands the difference. A lot of questions are on acceptable accounting system. Very important here that, as Sai has mentioned multiple times, third-party CPA audited or accounting system is required if you don't have a DCAA accepted accounting system. But there are specific stipulations, and your accountants, your CPAs are going to need time to get you audited. So if you're going to wait till December when this RFP drops and you run to your CPA then, you may not get the information in time for the proposal due date. You may want to look at this and start talking to your CPA firm early. The other lessons learned, CTA team members, or I'm not going to use CTA term. I'm just going to say your team members, regardless of the arrangement that you create, provide them with very clear instructions. Team members were required to submit proprietary information directly to the government. A number of small businesses or some number of companies did an excellent job with their proposal, but were disqualified because their team members did not follow instructions, were not given proper instructions. They sent passwords to the wrong email addresses. The government was unable to open their protected files. And so the entire team got eliminated. You don't want to make that mistake. After all the hard work, don't let a team member bring you down. And we have conducted a very deep analysis of successful and unsuccessful companies. Happy to discuss with any of you who would like to reach out to us. With that being said, I'm going to thank all the participants. I'm going to start asking some questions here, Sai, if you have a few more minutes. I also want to remind companies who may decide that CIO-SP4 is a good match, or they want to look at other IDIQs. We have other webinars coming up on the top 3 that we're tracking right now is the HHS LTASC, NGA Emerald, and STARS 3. So let me get to some of the questions here. And again, I think the most common one related to questions that have come in are related to the CTA joint venture versus prime sub. There, a lot of companies, Sai, are confused with the FAR numbers that we have used, 96011 versus 96012. Can we go back and touch on that just quickly?
Sure, yeah. 96011 is a joint venture, and 96012 is just a prime contractor subcontractor relationship.
Okay. It says, can personal corporate experience be used as past performance? I'm presuming the question is, can personal experience of the leadership of the firm be used as past performance?
So this says from the offeror, it doesn't expressly state that you can't, and the FAR says that you're allowed to use experience of key personnel or owners. I would think that's going to be drilled down a little bit further, or in the Q&A that comes out. You know, this is probably a year from now when the Q&A is issued. They're probably clarify that, but as it's written right now, in theory, you could rely on your own personally.
Okay. Here's another question, and it's an interesting one. Will the subcontractor socioeconomic status be considered? For example, if the prime is an 8A, the sub is a HUBZone, and I'm going to assume this isn't a joint venture because prime sub and a pure prime sub, the answer would be no. But if it was a JV and the lead was an 8A and another company was a HUBZone, do they get considered for award in both 8A and HUBZone?
No, because it does specifically state, and this makes sense just legally outside of the RFP, just based on SBA rules, that you have to follow the appropriate SBA rules for joint ventures, which means in order to qualify for 8A, the 8A or 8A companies, plural, have to own and control 51%. If it's HUBZone, HUBZone have to do that. If it's women-owned, the women-owned companies have to do that. So you have to meet all the various requirements, including ownership, control, profit distribution, and other things to qualify. So the only way you could have multiple designations for a JV is if the 51% owner or all of them have the multiple qualifications, each in the same proportion.
Okay, another question. Do you have, in order to be awarded as an 8A, is it 8A at the time of proposal submission or 8A at the time of contract award?
So for a sole source is the only time where you have to have both. So otherwise, you just have to be 8A at the time of proposal submission. And that's true now for everything, including HUBZone. They just changed the HUBZone rules. So as long as you qualify size and status at the time of proposal submission, you're good, even if it takes years to evaluate.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question here. When does the approval of an accounting system expire, or does it ever expire if it was audited by DCAA?
That's a good question for purposes of this. I think if you had it and it's within a year, you're probably guaranteed to be good. I would make sure that the adequacy of the accounting system has been audited within the prior 12 months before this period. Not that it has to be completely approved, it has to be adequate. So you don't need to have an approved system or like similar like a contract purchasing system. You need the government to come in. This just needs to be evaluated as being adequate, and you have to have documentation supporting that. So it's not as heavy a lift. So just make sure that if you're using a third-party CPA, they're aware of that and that they give you documentation. And I would have it ready within the past year if you can.
All right, we have a ton of more questions pending here. A lot of them have repeated themselves. We will answer the questions in writing and we'll try to categorize them so you can focus only on the questions that you're most interested in, but please be patient with us. We'll get Sai to answer as many as he can after this webinar. I'm sure we can spend an entire day discussing this otherwise. So Sai, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for answering a ton of these questions and hopefully clarifying for a lot of our participants how the CIO-SP4 procurement is going to work, at least in terms of teaming and being able to team with each other. When we release these slides to participants, there are a whole bunch of additional slides comparing at a high level CIO-SP3 and CIO-SP4. So you'll be able to see what changed between the two when we release the slides to you. Sai, any closing remarks?
No, I just say keep your eye out on things as they develop and as more guidance comes out. And I think we might circle back around at a later date whenever some of these things have been clarified and drill down. Continue doing so.
All right. Thank you all for your participation today. If you have additional questions or would like to use Proposal Helper for your CIO-SP4 and other efforts, please contact us at customersupport@proposalhelper.com. We have other IDIQs coming up. Webinars will be announced soon. The next 3 that we're planning on discussing are the HHS LTAS 3, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency Emerald, and of course, the other celebrity IDIQ, STARS 3.